The second day. Genji tightened his bow tie and looked outside through a crack in the curtains. Maybe the rain had died down a tiny bit since the previous night, but the thick rain clouds didn't seem like they'd be letting any trace of the morning sun get by. The morning was dim and far from refreshing. It seems it will last all day after all. Sorry for keeping you waiting, Genji-sama. Kanon finished checking his appearance and exited the washroom. On their normal schedule, it was rare for anyone to have to suffer going straight from a midnight shift to an early morning shift. They were on a special schedule for the 2 days of the family conference. However, unless the typhoon passed today, the relatives' stay on this island would last until tomorrow. Kanon thought it best to be prepared for this special schedule to last an extra day. The two of them left the guest house, opening their umbrellas. The rose garden had been devastated by the wind and rain on the previous night. Even though they'd spent several days making it beautiful to welcome the guests, one stormy night was enough to ruin it. Kanon sighed. The two headed for the mansion. They were supposed to meet up with Goda and prepare breakfast. Goda was such a perfectionist that he'd probably already woken up and was probably already preparing a breakfast as exquisite and elegant as glasswork. They reached the overhang by the entrance to the mansion and folded up their umbrellas. Genji took a bundle of several keys from his pocket and unlocked the front door. The Ushiromiya family mansion was the only thing on Rokkenjima, so in the past they hadn't been in the habit of locking up. However, Natsuhi had ordered that the mansion be locked up from midnight to early morning. Ever since then, unlocking the door in the early morning had become part of the servants' morning shift. 1 second. This task had been given to Genji and Kanon so that Goda could start preparing breakfast as soon as he woke up. Silence had fallen in the mansion, giving the impression that the mansion itself was asleep. Well then, let us begin the morning chores. Yes, sir. The two of them split up and began opening the curtains throughout the mansion. If the curtains stayed closed, the mansion would remain enveloped in faint darkness, as though it was still trapped in the previous night. Following a well-rehearsed procedure, Kanon went around the mansion, opening the curtains for one window after another without having to retrace his steps once. Even with this horrible weather, drawing the curtains made it feel just a little bit like morning. While doing that, he passed in front of the kitchen. Even though he hadn't smelled anything yet, his stomach started aching for some of Goda's prized cooking. Good morning. He tried to greet Goda, who should have been getting breakfast ready, but Goda was nowhere to be seen. The kitchen was darkly lit, and not only were the curtains not open, the fan wasn't even running. It was still cold without any trace of a fire being lit, so of course there were no signs of breakfast being made either. Though it would have been inexcusable, maybe Goda had overslept. Even servants are only human. They sometimes sleep in and show up late. In the rare case that such a thing happens, it's part of a servant's code to hide the unsightly scene before anyone notices. Smoothly cover it up, and make sure the family never even realize that anything has gone wrong. Kanon took the receiver of the phone that had been fitted to the wall and dialed the number for the extension line in the servant's sleeping room. He couldn't hear that characteristic sound of a dial tone. Kanon tried picking up the receiver again, but even so, he couldn't hear the usual dial tone. He tried dialing again, but it had no apparent effect. Could the lightning last night have damaged the machine, breaking the extension line? The equipment in this mansion was all worn out. Kanon fully understood that even the smallest thing could have caused it to break down. He gave up trying to wake Goda with the phone, and dashed over to the servant's sleeping room. How long has it been since I stopped sleeping and started lazily staring up at the ceiling? That vague sense of awakening was part of Natsuhi's usual morning experience. She always slept lightly, and she couldn't sleep at all without medicine. To Natsuhi, sleep was definitely not a happy thing. When she looked outside, she saw that it was still pouring. If she hadn't sensed a tiny amount of light, she might have mistakenly thought it was still the previous night. She herself was one of the hosts, so she mustn't wake up later than her guests. Urging herself on, she raised up her body, which still hadn't completely recovered from yesterday's weariness. No one would torment her as long as she'd remained inside this room, and her headache wouldn't get any worse here. This room was the only place she could find peace. So when she left, it meant returning to the world where her husband's siblings kept trying to stab each other in the back. In that case, wouldn't it be better to just stay locked up in this room forever? That ridiculous notion brought a bitter smile to Nancy's face. She was starting to sound like Kinzo. Though she often complained about Kinzo staying locked up in his own room and refusing to attend to everyone else, the truth was that she longed to do the same. Natsuhi gave her head a small shake, and her fantasy was replaced by the reawakening of her usual headache. When she reached for the doorknob, trying to leave the room, her hand touched the scorpion charm that she had hung from it before going to sleep the previous night. It was Maria's charm, which Natsuhi had received from Jessica. Didn't Jessica say something about it having the power to repel magic, telling her to hang it from her doorknob? Maybe it was thanks to the charm that at least this room had been protected from the malice of her husband's siblings. As she thought this, her mood began to get a little more cheerful. I wonder if I have Jessica to thank for the little bit of peaceful sleep I managed to receive. Then Natsuhi remembered. That's right, last night I promised Jessica that I'd give her a charm of my own in exchange for this one, didn't I? Natsuhi opened a drawer on her dresser and took out an antique accessory case that she had treasured when she was a child. Inside, there were many small objects that Natsuhi had thought were valuable at the time. From amidst those, she pulled out a red pouch. Inside was a small, round mirror about 10 centimeters across. It looked quite old, but the design on the back of the mirror was very ornate, and it felt like something with historical value. At the very least, it seemed much more authentic than the other charm, which looked like a plastic scorpion keychain. She had heard that this was a spiritual mirror for warding off evil spirits, and she had been given it specifically by her grandmother when her grandfather's mementos had been distributed. It had been believed since long ago that a strange power resided in this mirror. Perhaps people thought it could reflect calamity and malice in the same way it reflected light. Natsuhi returned the mirror to its pouch. It would probably be a fitting object to hand over to Jessica. Just as she was placing it in her pocket, the sound of someone knocking on the door suddenly echoed throughout the room. Yes? Good morning, madame. It is Genji. My apologies for waking you so early. I'm coming now. What is it? No servant had ever come to her this early in the morning, nor had they come to wake her in person. Perhaps something bad had happened. Maybe some fatal oversight had been made while preparing breakfast, something that would shame the household in front of their guests. Natsuhi took a deep breath in anticipation for whatever trouble she was about to hear of. When she opened the door, Genji once again gave a morning greeting while bowing deeply. Natsuhi tentatively responded, "Good morning. Did something happen?" "My apologies. It would seem that the telephones have broken down due to the lightning last night. The extension telephone isn't working, so please forgive my coming to see you directly." The extension telephone isn't working? That will be troublesome. Will it be possible to fix it? I'm afraid we don't know the location of the damage. Later on, I would like to call in an expert and have him repair it. Does that mean we'll be unable to have it repaired until after the typhoon passes? Then it will remain broken down for the duration of our guest's stay. Will that hamper our efforts to care for our guests? We will do all we can to ensure there are no problems. Very well. I'm counting on you to make sure we have no blunders. Natsuhi let out a small sigh of relief. She had been prepared for the worst, but damage to the telephones wasn't the kind of trouble she was worried about. Then again, even this would probably be enough to spark sarcasm from Eva. Natsuhi gave her head a light shake. Are the preparations for breakfast proceeding well? As to that, we haven't been able to find Goda. The arrangements for breakfast have yet to be carried out. What did you say? Natsuki was indignant. To her, this was a much bigger problem than the phones not working, and despite that, this piece of information was the part that had been postponed. Why did everything go well most of the time, and then come to something like this when the relatives were visiting? Natsuki put her head to her forehead and shook her head. Well, I suppose he slept in. At any rate, just see to it that someone hurries up and prepares breakfast. I don't care who. What? Natsuki exited into the hall and turned around for a second to close the door to her room. The creepy thing she saw there silenced her completely. It was an unpleasant sight, as though someone had dipped their fingers in a reddish-black liquid and scratched at the door around the doorknob. It was probably some sort of awful prank, arranged by some person who wanted to make it look as though they'd tried to force the door with bloody hands. What sort of prank is this? How awful. I also just noticed it as I came to call you. I will clean it later. Perhaps this is a vulgar joke by one of the guests. Disgusting. Truly disgusting. Who in the world would pull such a childish and disgusting prank? Natsuki had a pretty good idea, but of course there was no proof, so even if she pushed the issue, it would just seem as though she was making a fuss about nothing. In fact, it would surely be better to act as though she hadn't even realized that such a prank had been played on her. Natsuki gave the order to have it cleaned and then headed off to the parlor with a squeak of her heels. When Natsuki and Genji arrived in the parlor, Eva and Hideyoshi were already there. Good morning, everyone. Morning, Natsuki-san. I hear Goto-san would be making us breakfast, too. My stomach's been getting all excited since I woke up. Ha 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 ha. After all, it seems that food is all you can look forward to at the head family household. I'm pleased to see that you two are in high spirits so early in the morning, Eva-san. With a weary expression, Natsuki returned Eva's gaze, which was fiercely competitive despite the early hour. Then Kanon jogged in. After bowing an apology to the relatives for running inside the mansion, he noticed Genji and told him something in a small voice. Kanon, have you still not found Goto? My apologies, madame. I went all over the inside of the mansion and the guest house, but I still haven't found him. Where in the world has he gone? At any rate, breakfast is a higher priority than finding Goto right now. See to it immediately. Yes. Kanon glanced at Genji. It seemed he had something else to report, but was uncertain whether or not the words should come from him. Genji nodded and decided to give the report himself. Madame, it is not only Goto. Your husband is also nowhere to be found. My husband? Yes. Even before visiting you, I went to his room to tell him that breakfast wasn't being prepared, but I did not find him there. Furthermore, he is not the only one missing. Rudolph-sama, his wife, and Rosa-sama are nowhere to be found. Not in the guest house? Nor the mansion? Yes. They were not in their rooms in the guest house either. When she'd heard that Goto alone was missing, she'd assumed he had slept in or was loafing around somewhere. However, now that she'd learned that several of the relatives were also nowhere to be seen, she began to take a slightly more optimistic view. Could last night's family conference have continued all night up until the present moment? If so, they might have wanted to cool their heads after being shut in a stuffy room, going out for walks on their own through the rain. The part about cooling their heads really sounded like something Cross would say. Goto had probably been summoned to accompany them and aid them in some way. Goto was not a man who lost track of time. He had to understand that preparations for breakfast would be hindered if he did not return. However, maybe the family conference had continued until this very moment, with an atmosphere that would make it hard for anyone to slip out. Yes, that theory would be quite convincing for Natsuki. She remembered the illusion she'd felt that morning, as though the previous night had never ended. When she learned that the feeling wasn't just an illusion, she once again took a deep, weary breath. After all, that banquet of filthy vultures circling Kinzo's property was still going on. Perhaps they are still discussing the inheritance somewhere in the garden, or maybe the beach. At any rate, if we don't call Goto back, we'll never be able to begin preparations for breakfast. So what are you saying? Are Nissan and the rest still continuing their discussion? She had planned to say it in a small voice, but Hideyoshi overheard Natsuki and managed to grasp the situation. Nissan and Rudolph sure are tough. Maybe it's just youth in Rosa's case. Just a bit after midnight, the two of us were so tired that we headed back to bed, though I do remember that Nissan and the rest were still having a heated discussion at that point. Men certainly are unpleasant when they get all fired up. Natsuhi snorted, her face still blank. Kanon, search outside. If you find Goda, tell him to return immediately and begin preparing breakfast. Certainly. Natsuhi-ne-san, we don't know for sure that they're outside, do we? Couldn't they also be inside Father's study? I see, that's certainly possible. I don't know what path their conversation took, but there's certainly a chance they moved to Father's study and let him in on this discussion. I can't imagine that Father would willingly let them bring such a detestable topic into his study. You really think so? Well then, there's nothing we can do. I'm sorry, Genji-san and Kanan-kun, but could you search outside? It wouldn't be that strange for Nissan to suggest they go outside for a walk to cool their heads, even in this weather. I'll go to Father's study. Who knows, they might actually be there after all. Eva-san, I couldn't ask a guest like you to exert herself so. I will go. I can also wish him a good morning while I'm at it. Oh, then I'll leave it in your hands, though I somehow doubt he'll return your greeting. Natsuhi-ne-san, have you always been on such good terms with Father? I don't know whether you could call it that, but I am sure that I have gained his trust as the wife of the successor to the Ushiromiya family. Then I'm sure he'll at least answer you, right? I'd like to at least have breakfast with Father. Do you think you could convince him to come down and join us? It seems that he thoroughly despises the rest of us, but I'm sure he'll listen to you if he trusts you that much. After speaking so boldly, if you're unable to convince Father and come down alone, then I doubt you'll ever be able to claim that you've earned his trust again. I am not confident, but I will try. Natsuhi responded, looking discouraged. However, knowing Kinzo's temperament, she had absolutely no confidence in her ability to bring him out. Eva was clearly mocking her, confident that Natsuhi wouldn't be able to get Kinzo to come down, but even so, Natsuhi would lose face if she gave up, saying it was impossible and letting Eva go instead. Eva's mean-spirited and unreasonable demand made Natsuhi clench her fists slightly. When Genji realized this, he softly spoke to her over her shoulder. Madame, please take this if you would. And this is? Genji handed Natsuhi a sparkling gold key of ornate design. It was the key to Kinzo's study. The study had an auto-lock and couldn't be unlocked as long as Kinzo forbade entrance. However, since Genji was especially trusted by Kinzo, he was allowed to carry a key to that door. But if this key is used, won't you also receive the blame? When the master is sleeping deeply, simply knocking on the door will not suffice. And it would be more difficult to persuade the master to leave his room if you must talk through the door. Please use this. Genji. Until now, Natsuhi had thought of Genji as a cold servant who wouldn't do anything for her, since he worked directly under Kinzo. But it looked like she would have to alter her understanding of him. She wanted to communicate her gratitude, but by then Genji had already turned his back on her and was walking down the corridor with Kanon. But as Natsuhi watched them go, the words directed at her from behind were sneering. Well then, you must bring Father with you, okay? After all, it's his son's precious wife who's asking. I'm sure he'll listen to you. We're guests, so we'll just relax here at our leisure. Quit it, Eva. You're taking this too far. Sorry, Natsuhi-ne-san, but we're counting on you to deal with Father. Without answering, Natsuhi forcefully spun around on her heels and quickly left that place. After all that excitement the previous night, there was no way anyone was going to wake up early. George, Aniki, Jessica, and I were snoring loudly on the beds in the cousin's room, but Maria, who had gone straight to bed without joining in, was completely awake. As she rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around, she was met with the loud snoring of the other three cousins. For a while, Maria had to think about what had happened. After that, she realized that her mother wasn't with her, and she quickly got lonely. Maria left the cousin's room, trying to head to the room that had been arranged for her and her mother. Paying no heed to the three who were sleeping soundly, she slammed the door shut. In response, Battler mumbled and rolled over in his sleep, but it wasn't enough to wake him up. After a while, Maria returned, once again opening the door with a lively bang. Ooh. When she had left the room, her face had been sleepy, but now that she was back, she looked irritated. After that, she climbed up on Battler's bed, which happened to be the closest, and started yelling and jumping on it like it was a trampoline. Ooh, ooh, wake up. Ooh. What? Is it an enemy raid? Surround them! After making sure I was awake, Maria moved over to George Aniki's bed and started jumping on that too. In that manner, the three of us were all greeted with an extremely pleasant awakening. Thanks for waking us up, Maria-chan. You stopped us from sleeping in after that late night. If only you could have been a bit more gentle about it. George Ni-san, you really are an adult. I respect that. It'll be 7 o'clock soon. Well, it's not really a bad time to wake up. Ooh, Mama's not here. Ooh. Aunt Rosa? She wasn't in her room? I wonder if she's already woken up and gone to the mansion. Not here. Ooh. Ooh. Mama! Ooh. Maria kept groaning ooh and looking unhappy. She didn't exactly seem lonely because her mother wasn't around. It was more like she was irritated and thrown off balance because her mother wasn't where she'd expected. If we could just tell her where her mother was, that alone would probably calm her down. But unfortunately, we had no way of knowing where Aunt Rosa was, except that she wasn't here. Anyway, it's time for breakfast, so let's head over to the mansion. That's right, Maria, let's go to the mansion together, okay? I'm sure Aunt Rosa will be there, too. Ooh, Mama's in the mansion. Then I'll go there. Ooh. Yeah, I guess we should go to the mansion. Our parents have probably already gone there. Maria regained her usual composure so completely, her earlier tantrum seemed like a lie. We got dressed, left the room, and headed for the mansion. Once more there was a knocking sound on the sturdy door. There was no answer. He seemed to be sleeping still, and I could not wake him. If she went back downstairs and said something like that, Ava would probably be amused and triumphant. And even putting Ava aside, it was problematic that Kinzo had stayed shut away during this entire once-a-year conference, not even coming down to greet anyone. Even the family head, no, especially the family head, couldn't fail to make an appearance. I wonder if I can convince him myself. Natsuki readied herself and used the key that she'd borrowed from Genji to open the door. Even though she was prepared for the sweet stench, which seemed to eat into one's brain as it poured out the small crack in the door, she couldn't help but grimace. Thinking that he might still be sleeping, Natsuki entered the room quietly. When she did, Kinzo was already awake and looking down out of the window. So you're awake. Good morning. How did you get in? Kinzo spoke with his back still facing her. His voice was not harsh, but calm, and Natsuki was slightly reassured. However, though he was awake, he wouldn't have ignored all that knocking if he was in a good mood. Natsuki wasn't able to relax. My sincere apologies. I asked Genji-san, and he allowed me to borrow the key to the study. Oh, Genji did? If my friend thought it was that important, then I have no choice but to listen. So, what business do you have with me? Well, breakfast will be ready soon, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would join us. I will eat here. Have it brought here like always. But father, this family conference happens only once a year. Please, at least let them see your face. Go back downstairs. Are you asking me to join in as they discuss how to chew up my inheritance after I die? How foolish. Let them speak of such matters as much as they please, without me. And if that's what you call a family conference, it's hardly worth leaving my room for it. I'm busy. Do not bother me. His last words carried the threat that any further questions would not be appreciated. Natsuki realized that adding any further pleas would finally bring down his wrath on her. She didn't look forward to facing Ava's sarcasm, but there was nothing more Natsuki could do. Is that so? Understood. I'm sure everyone will be sorry to hear it, but I will tell them. Natsuki decided to give up. Bowing silently, she tried to leave the room before Kinzo's spasmodic temper could flare up. As she did, Kinzo spoke to her. His voice was so calm and gentle it felt like it came from an entirely different person. Natsuki, it has been quite some time since you married into the Ushiromiya family. Yes, it has been many years since I was first permitted to bear the name Ushiromiya. Do you sometimes long for your previous family? No. Marriage means abandoning your birth family. I am Ushiromiya Natsuki. The Ushiromiya family is the only family I can come home to, the only one I am fond of. She truly wasn't exaggerating. Such was the resolve she felt whenever she applied the Ushiromiya family name to herself. And that's precisely why she was so saddened when her husband didn't treat her like an Ushiromiya, leaving her to race about in vain. If Kraus were a woman, and you his husband... No, I won't say that. What do you mean by that, father? Natsuki was shocked. If Kinzo's words just now were what they seemed, it would have been more than enough to make up for all she'd suffered up to that point. Forget it. It's just the nonsense of an old man. Kinzo once again faced away from her. He told her to forget it, but Natsuki couldn't help feeling a warmth in her heart. Father, even though I, Natsuki, am not connected to you by blood, I am still your daughter. I will most assuredly see to it that your honor and glory and everything that you have left behind are protected. You do not have the right to wear the one-winged eagle. However, the one-winged eagle is surely engraved in your heart. That is irrefutable proof that you are my blood relative, one who will inherit the glory of the Ushiromiya family. Some will sneer that there is no eagle on your clothes, but such words are not worth lending an ear to. Only those who hold the eagle in their hearts are my true blood relatives. I now consider it an honor that you are welcomed into the Ushiromiya family. Without saying anything more, Kinzo remained with his back to Natsuki. However, Natsuki couldn't help but feel something warm well up inside her that she hadn't felt since long ago, since when she had been just a child. Natsuki bowed slightly to his back and left the room. Good timing. How is father? You were talking so long, so I came to check. When Natsuki left the study, she saw Eva climbing the stairs and their eyes met. Eva was smirking unpleasantly, thinking that Natsuki would leave grudgingly after failing to convince Kinzo. However, the way Natsuki was now, such a frivolous laugh would not disturb her. She was not permitted to wear the family crest on her clothing, but she was permitted to wear it in her heart. So she spoke calmly, clearly, and confidently, with the dignity of one who would protect the Ushiromiya family glory. Father said he would not join in on the family conference. He says he has no interest in discussing such obscene matters. I figured you'd say something like that. If you failed to persuade father, just say so. How pitiful. I'm beginning to see why father lamented so. What do you mean by that? Natsuki did not answer. Just as Kinzo had done earlier, she showed Eva her back as she headed down the stairs. Eva finally realized that she was being made fun of, that something had happened to quickly bolster Natsuki's confidence. Even so, she apparently didn't have the courage to risk Kinzo's wrath. Unable to even knock on the door, she could only click her tongue, make a motion as though scratching at it, and follow after Natsuki. So, were Nissan and the rest there? Did you ask father about them? I didn't get the chance to ask, but they were not inside the study. Father would never let them into his room to discuss such a lowly topic, so it is unlikely he knows where they went. Let us go downstairs and wait for the servants to return from their search. Breakfast may be late, but how would you like some tea, Eva-san? That would be fine. Eva couldn't hide her confusion at the complete difference in Natsuki's attitude. She was acting so boldly, and while Eva hated to admit it, she even had a sense of dignity about her. Unable to find fault with anything, Eva could only follow Natsuki back to the parlor. When the two of them returned to the parlor, Hideyoshi had been joined by the 4 children and Nanjo. Genji, who had been talking with Hideyoshi, reported the current situation when he noticed that Natsuki had returned. You still have not found my husband and the rest? Yes, my apologies. Also, Kumasawa has started preparing breakfast. She said that she will need just a little longer. clock read a little past 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock should have been the time to start breakfast. Normally going over that time limit would be a disgrace to the host. Cannon is now surging outside. Also, no one has seen Shannon either. Even Shannon's missing? Truly, just how many people did my husband bring with him on his little walk? Just how many people had gone missing by now? Now that the number was this large, it was starting to feel truly unpleasant, as though the people here were the only ones being left out of something interesting. At least that seemed to reflect the feelings of the children, and Maria in particular. She was indignant, her stomach grumbling, almost as though her mother and the others had left her alone to go off and eat something delicious without her. The other children were flipping through the channels on the television, trying to find a program that might interest Maria and cheer her up again. Nanjo was sitting on the sofa, gazing blissfully at the children while reading a book. It must have been a book about chess. The sound of footsteps came rushing towards them with a pitter-patter. There was only one set, so they realized before seeing who it belonged to that it was probably Cannon, not Kraus and the rest. Excuse me. Judging by your appearance, you still haven't been able to find them. My apologies. I still haven't. That will be enough. You've worked hard. She didn't know where they were, but they had to be somewhere on this island. They hadn't had a thing to eat since the previous night, so their stomachs must be growling about now. They'd probably come plodding back of their own accord before long. By now, Natsuki was thoroughly exasperated and started to feel that there was no reason for them to go out of their way in search. I will go to the kitchen to prepare some tea for all of the guests. Thanks to both of you for all of your hard work so early in the morning. Natsuki left the parlor, acting as though the release and tension had caused a new surge in her headache. Ken tried to call to her back, but Natsuki left swiftly. What is it? Was there something else? Yes. I was unable to find her husband or anyone else, but, well, Ken sounded evasive. It looked as though he didn't know where they were, but had spotted something that might be connected to their disappearance. Eva and Hideyoshi noticed this exchange of words and came over. They'd probably picked up on something strange in Kanon's behavior. What's going on, Kanon-kun? Did you find Kraus and Nisan and everyone else? Actually, the Rose Garden storehouse looked strange. What do you mean, it looked strange? It was, how should I explain it? Kanon hesitated once more. His tone wasn't at all what you'd expect from this usually fearless boy. Seeing this, Eva and Hideyoshi looked at each other dubiously. What do you mean? Are you saying Nisan and the others were inside the storehouse? No, I am going to inspect the inside now. I just now came back to get the key, but, I don't really get it, but it sounds like we just gotta look around inside it. Where's the key to that storehouse? It is in the servant room. Let us check inside the storehouse at once. Kanon dashed off to the servant room and returned with the key. Genji left the parlor saying that he would go check, but then Eva and Hideyoshi followed after him. What was this something strange about the storehouse that had caused the usually fearless Kanon to hesitate? It was still pouring outside, but perhaps their curiosity over this something that Kanon couldn't talk about won out. While the children made a big fuss watching television, Kanon and the rest dashed over to the entrance. The Rose Garden storehouse was a place that housed various tools used to manage the garden. It was definitely not a pretty building. Because of its appearance, it had been built so that it was hidden in a corner of the Rose Garden. Kanon, Genji, Eva, and Hideyoshi came cutting across the Rose Garden holding umbrellas. They entered a small path just off the Rose Garden, which was normally off limits for those appreciating the garden, and only used by those maintaining it. As they dashed down that, the storehouse came into view in front of them. It was quite an old shed, and compared to the flawlessly perfect beauty of the Rose Garden, it was pretty seedy looking. It was easy to understand why it had been built in a hard-to-see place. Eva and Hideyoshi arrived at the storehouse long after Kanon and Genji. You two sure are fast. I thought my heart was gonna explode. I never knew they had a storehouse way over here. But what is that? When Eva looked where Kanon was pointing, she was at a loss for words. Noticing this, Hideyoshi also followed Kanon's finger and was likewise too shocked to speak. The entrance to the storehouse was kind of a shutter, and there, everyone suddenly realized why Kanon had been unable to find words to describe what they now saw. On the shutter, which was completely filthy from being exposed to wind and rain for so long, stuck right on it, there was something that looked like a strange, dark red liquid? Mucus? Or maybe it was some sticky paint. An indescribably eerie shape was drawn on the shutter with some kind of ghastly substance. The rain had caused it to drip down like fresh blood leaking from an open wound. No more beating around the bush. Some kind of mark was drawn there, with a ghastly substance that looked like blood, in a shape that seemed to suggest something ominous. 2 circles were drawn there, and inside of them was a design that looked like a cross. The 4 ends of the cross were widely exaggerated, and it looked like some kind of crest from somewhere around Europe. And the cracks between those shapes, written closely packed together, were some unfamiliar characters or possibly symbols. What a vulgar bit of graffiti. Could this be one of those magic circles used in demonic ceremonies? It wasn't surprising that Hideyoshi would say that about such a ghastly shape, drawn with a deep red, dripping substance. When was this made? There was nothing drawn on here when I came by yesterday, before it started raining. We must do something before anyone else sees this. If they laid eyes upon it, it would cause them great discomfort. That's right. Even though it's just a shed, I wouldn't want to leave such an unpleasant piece of graffiti alone for even a second longer than I had to. There's some paint inside the storehouse. Let us paint over it temporarily as an emergency measure, then repaint it again someday when the weather is good. Genji remembered that he had just recently seen another scribble, and that it too had been made with a strange dark red substance of the same color as this. That must have been, that's right, he had seen it on the door to Natsuhi's room. Kanon-kun, let's remove this scribble quickly and go back, okay? Even though it's just a storehouse, it's really irritating to have graffiti around the home I was brought up in. Yes, ma'am. I will take care of it immediately. Kanon squatted in front of the shutter and unlocked it. He then lifted it up with all of his strength. A boisterous noise resounded, and the eerie shape drawn on the shutter began to get sucked in through the top as the shutter was raised. At least for the time being, that ominous drawing disappeared from their direct gaze, and they all breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks to a kids program they came across, Maria was feeling much better. Fowler and Jessica were poking fun at the kids show at every turn, cackling together. George was enjoying the program with Maria from her perspective. Nanjo sat on a sofa by himself, passing the time by reading quietly. They heard hurried footsteps coming from the hallway. They were the footsteps of a single person. Did that mean it wasn't the group of 4 that had just left? It was Genji. It is very rare for Genji, who considered being out of breath a violation of a servant's virtues, to be gasping for air. He had probably come dashing back from outside the mansion. His shoulders were soaking wet, and he didn't have his usual trim appearance. When Genji noticed Nanjo looking at him, he gave a small silent bow and quickly approached him. Dr. Nanjo, my apologies. Please, come with me. Quickly. What is the matter? As Genji whispered something to Nanjo's ear, Nanjo went pale. He rose from the sofa, trying not to be noticed by the children who were still engrossed by the TV, and the 2 of them rapidly left the parlor, muffling their footsteps. Just as they were about to exit the parlor, they came across Natsuhi, who was pushing a serving cart loaded with a tea set. Genji whispered something into Natsuhi's ear, and Natsuhi went pale too in apparent shock. And leaving the serving cart where it was, the 3 of them dashed towards the entrance. George noticed them running down the rose garden through the window. What's that? Isn't that Genji-san and Dr. Nanjo? And that's Aunt Natsuhi, isn't it? What's up, Aniki? Maybe something happened. They all looked terribly flustered. When Jessica and Maria saw that Eva, Hideyoshi, and Nanjo were no longer in their seats and that the serving cart had also been abandoned in the entrance to the parlor, they also realized that something was the matter. Could there have been some kind of accident? Let's go check it out. It's no fun if we're the only ones left out, right? Hee. For some reason, what Butler had said sounded extremely indiscreet, but they couldn't deny that they were a little insecure and concerned after seeing the adults run off into the rain without regards to their appearance. Let's check it out, okay? I'm worried something might have happened. Jessica's uneasy words spoke for all of them. Hey Maria, are you coming too? Or will you watch TV? Ooh, wanna watch TV? Ooh. Let's go on without her. Maria-chan, we'll be back soon. You keep watching TV, okay? Ooh. By the time the kids made it outside, the adults were no longer in sight. But Jessica seemed to have a pretty good idea where they'd gone, judging by the direction they'd been running. Following Jessica, we ran through the rain-soaked rose garden. The wind seemed to suddenly get stronger. The malicious sound of thunder began to rumble like it had the previous night. I felt like an eerie something had surrounded the island and was trying to stop us from moving forward. Jessica, is there something over this way? I'm pretty sure there's a shed for gardening tools or something. What in the world could be going on in a place like that? Just as Jessica had said, they began to see a storehouse in front of them. They could also see the adults there. The shutter to the storehouse was open, and several adults looked as though they were searching for something. For some reason, only Natsuki was outside of the storehouse. Without even holding an umbrella, she looked like she was hanging her head, and her back was facing them. There's Genji, Nanjo, and Natsuki, who had just left the mansion. The ones who had left earlier, Kano and Eva and Hideyoshi, were also there, making for a small crowd of people, but there was absolutely no bustle of activity. Natsuki realized that the children were approaching. A terrible expression rose to her face, and she ran at them with her arms spread wide. You mustn't come any closer. Go back to the mansion. But despite that, no, because of that, the kids saw the scene Natsuki was trying to keep them away from. Inside the storehouse, with its shutter wide open, a faint fluorescent light shone down, and right there was... Jessica's piercing shriek ran out, but that was just because Jessica's scream was the loudest. The same thing spilled out of Butler and George's mouths as well. Ava spread her arms just like Natsuki, roaring at the kids with a bone-chilling expression on her face. George, take everyone and return to the mansion, quickly, right now. When Natsuki spread her arms, I thought she was trying to prevent us from advancing any further. That wasn't why Ava was spreading her arms right now. She was trying to stop us kids from seeing that terrible scene. It was her mother's heart, trying to protect the eyes and hearts of us children by blocking our view of that terrible scene by at least the width of her arms. Is this some kind of a joke? Is it... I'd seen this kind of cheap scene all too often in manga, TV, anime, and movies. I'd seen it over and over again. This was just seeing something appear in real life that I'd seen plenty of times before in some of those more sensational movies, right? That alone shouldn't... But that suit, it's that old bastards, isn't it? I get it, and that's Uncle Kraus, and Kiriya-san and Aunt Rosa. Dad! You mustn't, Jessica. You mustn't go in. You mustn't look. Dad! Rigor mortis has set in across almost the entire body, most likely. 6 hours or more have passed since death. As far as I can tell by looking at the damaged area, there's a high probability that they were damaged after their deaths. No, I must watch what I say. I'm a general practitioner. Examining corpses is outside my area of expertise. So what's going on here? Just killing them wasn't enough, so they went on to do something like this? The devil. This here's the work of the devil. Natsuki caught Jessica in her arms, and Aunt Ava caught George Aniki, so I was the only one who could approach the entrance to the storehouse. If only there had been someone there to catch me too, I wouldn't have needed to have this horrible evil scene burned into my eyes. No, that's not it. It isn't that there's no one here to catch me. The people who should catch me, they're right here, aren't they? Just as Jessica said, it did look like a storehouse for gardening tools. A lawnmower with extra blades, a grass sickle, and a hammer, some carpentry tools such as a saw, piled up potted plants and bags of fertilizer, and treated just the same. The corpses of several people had been laid to rest there. No, had been tossed in there. I could tell them by their clothes. That old bastard and Kiriya-san, Uncle Kraus and Aunt Rosa. Beyond that, Goda-san, and are there still more of them? How many people died? You're fucking kidding me. That's more than I can count on one hand. Damn it. I didn't know whether it had been one of those gardening tools which, if used for something other than their intended purpose, would definitely be wielded with a naked brutality, or whether some horrible tool had been brought in here specifically for this. Anyway, each of the bodies jammed in here had been given an atrocious makeup. It wasn't makeup, it was more like their faces had been plowed. Their faces were smashed, forced into expressions that normal people couldn't make even after death. I couldn't tell where the eyes or the noses were, but I could find their mouths because they were gaping wide, their gums exposed, but their front teeth were missing, and even the cheeks that should have been covered were all torn up and laid bare. That trendy makeup you always spent so much time on even though you're a man isn't doing a thing now. Dad, I always thought you were going to hell, but still not like this, right? You weren't such a son of a bitch that you should have to suffer so brutally. And Kira-san, did I tell you to stop going out with this guy? There's absolutely no reason for you to end up like this, too. They've got no faces. No faces. Damn it, damn it. Father-son, you mustn't look anymore. There's no way your mother and father would want you to see them like this. For their sakes, you mustn't look anymore. And people are supposed to have faces that look like they're sleeping peacefully, right? They've got no faces. My dad and Kira-san have no faces. I don't even know what kind of faces they were wearing when they died. What's wrong with me? Will I have to see those smashed monster-like faces every time I remember them? That's just great. I didn't want to remember that old bastard smoke face anyway. That's great, just great. But why even Kira-san's face? Kira-san wasn't a crook. Sure, she'd take me off a bit now and then, but she was like a cool big sister to me. This is wrong. This is all wrong. At least Uncle Kraus has it better, doesn't he? It's not his whole face, just the side. At least he's got half his face left, right? That's still better, that's still better. Oh. Jessica filled her ears with the sound of her own screaming, trying to shut out my reckless words. Stop it, Butler-kun. Just stop it. Just stop it. Aniki, Aniki. Disregarding age and appearance, I fell to my knees, clinging to Aniki's waist and sobbing. It was as if I was crying on behalf of everyone there, representing the feelings of everyone there. I screamed over and over. Father, the ones lying over there are Uncle Kraus, Uncle Rudolph, Aunt Kyrie, and Aunt Rosa and Goda-san. Just those 5, right? No. There are 6 people. There's one more person over here. The body Hideyoshi was looking down on now happened to be hidden among the shadows in the mountain range of objects, in a blind spot to George, who stood by the entrance. So George couldn't tell whose body it was. So George cursed himself. He cursed the fact that his worst guesses always turned out to be right. So the one lying at your feet is Shannon, isn't it? Yes, it's Shannon-chan. George fell completely silent. He shook slightly, his lower lip trembling. Normally, he would have wanted to run to his beloved body, screaming and crying. However, before rashly rushing forward, he worked to keep his composure and asked his father, "Is Shannon the same as Uncle Kraus and the others?" Hideyoshi deeply understood the meaning of those words, so he couldn't give George an immediate answer. Or rather, he felt that silence was the only sincere and loving response he could give George right now. When George asked if Shannon was the same, he meant to ask whether her corpse was in the same condition as the others or not. Since Hideyoshi hadn't denied it, it meant her corpse was in the same brutal state. "Can I look at Shannon?" "No, you can't." "Why not? After all, I won't be able to see Shannon's face again, right? So why won't you let me see what her face looked like at the end?" "The last time you met Shannon-chan was yesterday, right?" "Yes." "I see. When you left her, what kind of face was she showing you?" "It was a wonderful smile." After he handed her the ring, she hesitated, even though she must have already made up her mind. Then she looked bashful and ran away because she was embarrassed to let him see her face looking like that. It's the expression that was revived in George's mind. I see. Then I'm sure Shannon-chan would want to leave you with that smile in your memory. Hideyoshi looked down upon Shannon's body lying at his feet. Just like the other bodies, it was in such a horrible state that it'd make anyone want to cover their eyes. Her head had been smashed in from the side, and no more than half of her expression remained. If the remaining blood-soaked half of her expression had been wiped clean, would that graceful smile of hers have peeked out, but only half of it? Without thinking, Hideyoshi slapped his hands over his eyes. How brutal. If her face was going to be crushed anyway, then if only all of it had been crushed, he might have been able to temporarily distract George from his pain by making the pathetic suggestion that it was someone else wearing Shannon's clothes, but half of her face had been left untouched. It caused the body so much humiliation while still proving beyond a doubt that the body was Shannon's and no one else's. How inhuman, how brutish. And there, trying his best to burn the image of the remaining half of Shannon's expression into his eyes as she lay at Hideyoshi's feet, was Cannon. Cannon was not crying. Tears had risen to his eyes, but they did not drip down. But that didn't mean he wasn't feeling as much sadness as everyone else. Losing Shannon, who had lived with him in the same orphanage, whom he had loved as a sister, must have been just the same as losing a blood relative. George, I'm sure Shannon-chan is saying thank you. She must be glad you didn't end up seeing her in such a pitiful state. I'm sure she's thanking you for holding strong and showing restraint. I understand, Father, I understand. George leaned against the outside wall of the storehouse, crouching down limply. Father, I have a request. What is it? I want you to look for me. Is there a ring on Shannon's finger? A ring? Let me see. Hideyoshi crouched down. As he did, Cannon silently pointed to one of Shannon's hands. Yeah, there is. It's a diamond ring, with a valuable diamond. Must have been pretty expensive. And which hand and which finger is it on? The ring finger of her left hand. I see. So Shannon-chan was engaged? George, don't tell me you... Ava, that doesn't matter now. A man made a lifelong promise to Shannon-chan. A man promised her happiness for life. Who that man was isn't the issue here. Being told that by a man is the woman's dream, isn't it? And I don't know when she received this ring. I also don't know who gave it to her. However, even so, Shannon-chan took this ring, then she accepted it and put it on her left ring finger. I'm sure the man who gave it to her was also happy. To most of the people here, Hideyoshi was simply disturbed by this extraordinary situation and was blurting out nonsense. However, someone who knew of George and Shannon's true relationship would understand the full meaning of those words. I see. Thank you, Father. George stood up. The traces of tears still streaked his face, but his expression had returned to its usual calm one. Let's go. Valor-kun, Jessica-chan. If we stay here any longer, we'll get in the way of the adults. You're right. Jessica snuffled once, showing her face to her mother, who had been holding her the whole time to let her know she was okay now. When she faced George again, she once again had on her usual expression, although she still couldn't smile. Battler, hang in there. Battler kept on crouching in front of his parents' bodies. I'm sorry. Crying like hell calmed me down. You bastard, Dad, I bet you're laughing at me. After all that shit I talked about you, here I am crying like a baby just because you died. So what? I guess I just got the gene that makes you cry when your parents kick the bucket. Balor's face was still bright red from the tears, but he had at least recovered enough to fake a smile, if only a bitter one. Cannon, you mustn't remain here any longer either. Take the children and return to the mansion. Natsu had been standing under the rain this whole time, unable to take a step into the storehouse. Maybe she had her own way of grieving different than Balor's. Realizing that she had to take on a role of responsibility now that her husband was dead, she gave Cannon these orders. Yes, madame. Cannon rose silently and turned to face me. His face was pure white, almost as though his own heart had died along with Shannon. There was no life in his expression. On an ordinary day, if he had been told to guide the children through the beautiful rose garden, Cannon might have led the way. But now there was no distinction between Canon and the children. They were now just kids of about the same age, suffering the pain of losing those close to them. After making sure that the children were leaving, Natsu started giving orders to Genji. Genji, contact the police immediately. They probably won't be able to come until after the typhoon passes, but they should be able to tell us what to do next. Understood. There's an emergency radio, so I will use that to contact them. When she heard that, Natsuki remembered. That's right, the phones were out today, weren't they? However, they had also had a radio since they couldn't necessarily rely on phones all the time while living on an isolated island. At any rate, they should start by contacting the police and receiving their instructions. Everything else could wait. Dr. Nancho, is there anything more you can do here? Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do. Understood. Genji, could you at least cover their faces with something? Exposing them like this is humiliating to them as well. Yes, ma'am. Genji picked up several dried-up towels from inside the storehouse when Ava stopped him with a shrill voice. Wait a second. Stop. This is the scene of the crime, isn't it? Then we mustn't disturb it. We all panicked and walked in here with our shoes on, but even that will surely get in the way of the police's investigation, right? Nancy glared at Ava, offended. Objectively speaking, Ava was right. Even so, she glared at Ava as though accusing her of refusing to do those tragic corpses which had been humiliated even after death, the simple kindness of covering their faces. However, Ava had spoken both calmly and correctly. This horrible situation definitely wasn't an accident. It was a crime. Someone had killed them. It was a murder case. So they needed to be careful to avoid disturbing the site any further. They had to do what little they could to aid the police, preserving clues that might help catch the detestable culprit. I agree with Ava-san. Until the police come, we should leave everything be. What do you say, madame? You're right. Very well. Close it up. And, just in case, we should put a different lock on it. A different lock? Yes. When we came here, the shutter was locked. That means the culprit used the key to the shutter to lock it. That makes sense. So, does that mean the key that opens the shutter will have the culprit's fingerprints on it? I'm sure it'll be worth submitting it to the police as evidence, but Kanon-kun actually has it, and he used it to unlock the shed just now. It will probably have Kanon's fingerprints on it. Also, that key was handed to Genji-san just now, and he took it with his bare hands. Doesn't look like it'll be very useful as evidence. That was careless of me. My apologies. Genji-san, are there any other keys to the storehouse? No. Only this one. So the culprit walked out of the servant room with that key, and then was nice enough to return the key to where they found it? Hideyoshi's theory sounded plausible, but was actually very strange, if you thought about it. Why would they go to all the trouble of returning a key they stole? Now, if you think about it even more deeply, there are some points that are even more bizarre. When a criminal hides a body, they're usually trying to delay the point at which it'll be found so they can use that time to escape. The six weren't necessarily killed here, but it was reasonable to assume that they were killed somewhere on this island, carried to the storehouse, and hidden to delay the discovery of the crime. And yet the eerie magic circle scribbled on the storehouse shutter had eloquently indicated the location of the hidden corpses. Sure, it didn't explicitly mention the corpses, but 6 people had gone missing. In that situation, someone had made such an obvious piece of graffiti and even returned the key to the shutter, almost as though they wanted the corpses here to be discovered. Anyway, we can't put all of our faith in a lock that the culprit has opened once before. If we want to protect this place from the culprit's hand, I think we should put a new lock on it. I think that was a good plan. I agree. Genji fished around inside the storehouse and unsealed a brand new padlock that had been inside a small box. What should I do with the key? I will take it. I will take responsibility and hand it over to the police. Natsuki took the key to the padlock from Genji's hand. After that, they all exited and lowered the shutter. And so, the corpses were once again sealed behind that shutter, which was still covered with that creepy magic circle. Genji crouched down from the shutter to fasten the new padlock. Shutters often have a place in front where you can attach your own lock in addition to the main lock of the shutter. This was one of those types. In the midst of the roar of thunder and the pouring rain, the storehouse stood there, ominously, with its closed shutter still covered in a blood-like creepy substance. It swallowed up the bodies of the 6. Did Natsuki putting the new lock on wasn't mainly to preserve the scene for the police. She might have felt like she wanted to shut that mouth for all eternity to prevent that eerie beast from swallowing up any more victims. Come on, let's go, everyone. Dr. Nanjo, thank you very much for your work. Genji, hurry and contact the police. I will do as soon as I return. The adults left the storehouse. The ghastly magic circle drawn on the shutter kept the 6 bodies in its throat, looming eerily as the lightning occasionally lit it up. The quirk of this is that the sprites have been updated. Let me save first. Okay. Here. I'll read them, the ones that have changed. Ushirimiya Kraus. His corpse was found inside the Rose Garden storehouse. The direct cause of death is unknown, but it seemed the side of his head was smashed after his death. This is the beginning of everything. Ushirimiya Rudolph. Same text. He has a right to lament his ill fortune. Ushirimiya Kyrie. Chosen by the demon's roulette. That's all there is to it. Ushirimiya Rosa. We'll get to see her again, so I don't feel lonely. Servant Shannon. Don't worry. Everyone will be revived in the Golden Land. Servant Goda. How unfortunate. Apparently he was originally supposed to be on duty in the guest house. And I don't think that descriptions have been updated with the remaining characters. All that could be heard was the sound of the rain, the voices from the kids' TV program Maria was watching, and the engrossed Maria's cackling voice. In other words, what greeted them as they returned dumbfounded from that horrible, bizarre scene was the voice of Maria as she rolled around laughing at the TV. Those who returned to the room didn't know how to explain to Maria that her mother was dead and were trapped by a suffocating silence. At first, Maria returned their stares with a dubious look, but when she realized they weren't trying to blame her for anything, she ignored them and again immersed herself in the TV program. The children wordlessly sat down heavily on the sofa. Their minds were probably blank from their state of shock. Everyone had already cried and mourned so much, but now they just vaguely sat there, their faces seeming to have lost all emotion. Only Cannon had returned to his usual calm expression. However, that probably didn't mean he'd been able to wipe out the shock. Nothing was reflected in his eyes as he stared into empty space. Hideyoshi kept on fidgeting, and every time he remembered that horrible scene, he started muttering about how he couldn't believe it, how it couldn't have been something from this world, how it must have been the work of demons. Every now and then his muttering produced a question directed at Nanjo, but the latter kept repeating in a calm doctor-like manner that nothing could be understood by only glancing at the scene, and that until the police arrived he wouldn't learn anything. However, Nanjo only appeared calm next to Hideyoshi, who simply couldn't suppress his agitation and fear. In fact, Nanjo had also received a huge shock, and his face was deathly pale. Maybe that atmosphere was why she tried to rise to the challenge and take charge. Natsuki appeared to be unchanged from her normal attitude, and she briskly gave directions. I will go see father. Genji, quickly contact the police. Certainly. I wonder if you would allow me to tag along, Natsuki-san. Since Krasny-san is now gone, the task of aiding father has been left to me. It would be improper of me to relax here while relying entirely on you. Natsuki was struck speechless by Ava's aggressive move in a situation like this. She seemed to be claiming that with Kraus dead, the one to take responsibility shouldn't be his wife, but herself, the next highly ranked in the family. Or maybe she hadn't been at all happy when Natsuki took command without reference to her in such an extreme situation. However, even Ava's mind had been blank from shock until a moment ago. She only came to her senses after Natsuki started giving orders. Just do as you like. Natsuki started walking without saying a word more. Ava followed behind her. As they did, Kumasawa ran into the parlor. She usually wasn't the kind of person to run around, so under normal conditions, most people would have taken her entrance as a sign that something was the matter, but because everyone was still stricken with shock, they hardly even noticed her. Madame! If you're looking for Natsuki-san, she went to see father. She'll probably be back soon. What happened, Kumasawa-san? You see, in that dining hall there was blood. Blood! The ears of everyone in the parlor twitched. Everyone thought the same thing. I hope I misheard that. Any container can only hold so much, and no one here would be capable of handling yet another tragedy. So they all thought it. I hope I misheard that. What happened in the dining hall? When I went to the dining hall to set up for breakfast. First one to start running was George. His harsh footsteps jogged Hideyoshi and Nanjo to their senses, and they chased after him. Battler and the others followed. They flew into the dining hall one after the other, but they didn't find any change that might have caused Kumasawa to go pale. To those who had viewed that gruesome scene in the storehouse, it was a bit of an anticlimax. However, Kumasawa, who had followed them, pointed it out. There really were some traces of blood remaining on the floor. Compared to that terrible scene, it wasn't very impressive. However, if you calmly thought about it, this definitely indicated the loss of a lot of blood. There's another puddle of blood over here. What in the world? It appears that a great deal of time has passed. It's probably safe to say that they were killed here last night. It definitely looks that way. We were talking together in the dining hall late into the night. After that, someone must have forced their way in. Dad, when did you and Mom slip out of the meeting and go to sleep? It was a little past midnight. So we probably should assume it happened after that. Are you kidding me? Give me a break. Milady, please, stay strong. After seeing that hell on earth in the storehouses is nothing. Really? Good for you. I feel like my head's gonna explode. This is the dining hall, right? Every day this is where I eat, complain about school, complain about homework, talk to my dad about my grades. That's what this place is to me. Milady, it wouldn't be good to remain here any longer. Let's return to the parlor. I agree. Uncle Hideyoshi, I think this room will be really important to the police. Don't you think it'll be bad if we trampled all over it? Battler proposed this in a slightly firm voice as, along with Ken, he grabbed the pail and shaking Jessica's shoulders. Everything is just as Battler-san has said. There's nothing more to be gained from remaining in this room. Nanjo spoke while looking at everyone's pale faces. Even though that horrible scene in the storehouse felt like something out of this world. At least then we'd been able to leave, to cut ourselves off from that place and run away. Everyone had shared in that feeling. However, this dining hall was different. It was in the mansion, the main building on this estate, and as Jessica had said, it should have been one of the most calming places even inside the mansion. It was where all of the relatives had eaten lunch and dinner yesterday. The shock of seeing this place smeared with blood reminded us of all that horrible spectacle in the storehouse. It forced us to accept that we hadn't really been able to run away from the scene of that tragedy. I agree too. The culprit might have left traces in this room. Amateurs like us shouldn't stir the place up. Let's leave quickly. Quickly. Hideyoshi also understood the meaning of what Battler had said and pushed everyone to hurry out of the dining hall. The way we were then looking at that blood any longer would have been too harsh. Nobody went against his words. Everyone raced each other out of the dining hall. It was almost as though the last person in this room would be trapped in there all alone. Once in the hallway, we lent a hand to Kumasawa, who was still trembling and leaning against the wall, and we all headed back to the parlor together. Then Genji returned. Oh, Genji-san, were you able to contact the police? As to that, I'm afraid I must apologize. I don't know if it was a failure of the radio or something else that caused it, but... What the? So you couldn't contact the police? But the phone and the radio failed? My apologies. The boat will be arriving on Monday morning, and I believe we will be able to borrow their communications equipment. Isn't there a boat on this island? Can't we just take a little trip out to the Nijima Police Department? Hideyoshi-san, that would be impossible with this weather. At the very least, we can't do anything until the typhoon passes us by. Kurosama's boat is being repaired and is not on this island, therefore we must wait for the boat coming on Monday. How could this happen? 6 people are dead. Phones and radio aren't working and there's no boat. So until the typhoon passes and the boat comes, in other words, until tomorrow morning, we're gonna be stuck here on this island, unable to contact the police, aren't we? Which means that not only us, but the criminal who killed everyone is also confined to this island. That certainly follows. The culprit who killed everyone is still here on the island. So the bastard who killed Dad and the others must still be hiding somewhere, unable to escape. Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it. I'll catch that bastard. No way I'll hand him over to the police. I'll slice him to bits myself. Maria had finally realized that something odd was happening in the parlor. Rather than noticing something odd, it was probably better to say she felt unhappy and neglected, since everyone was getting so excited about about something only she didn't know about. Ooh, Jessica One-chan, did someone die? The way she spoke was completely calm, just as though she was talking about someone who had appeared on a television drama, as though it was someone else's problem. Jessica probably didn't like that. As though trying to say, can't you tell just by looking at me? Overwhelmed with grief, she flared up at Maria. They all died. Everyone. My dad and Bella's parents. Goda-san and Shannon. And even your mother, too. Stop it, Jessica-chan. You aren't the only one who's sad. Maria-san, I know this will come as a shock, but please listen. Your mother has died. Mama died? Ooh. Yeah, someone killed her. I know it's sad, but stay strong. How many people died? 6 people. 6 people. Damn it. How could anyone do something that cruel? There's a limit to how cruel you can be if you're human. I don't know who it is, but a culprit isn't human. There's no way that their blood is red. Ooh. The culprit isn't human. It's just the... chosen by the... Huh? Hey, Maria, did you say something just now? Maria had said something, but since the words were so remotely separated from the flow and context of the conversation, I couldn't understand them for a second. When I tried to ask her to repeat it again, I was shocked by the sudden sound of Aunt Nazi's loud voice coming from the entrance to the parlor. It looked like Aunt Nazi and Aunt Ava had returned from their trip to see Grandfather. You can't contact them even with the radio? If we can't use it at a time like this, why do we even have an emergency radio? My apologies. It was supposed to have a maintenance inspection every year. Wait, don't you have one of those boat signaling devices that makes a flashing light? Couldn't you use that to contact the next island? We do not have such equipment. My sincere apologies. Just then Kumasawa arrived, pushing a serving cart loaded with breakfast. Since there was no way we'd be able to eat in the dining hall, Hideyoshi ordered her to take it to the parlor. Why are we eating breakfast here? Natsu-san, I'll tell you later. More importantly, Ava, how is father? Judging by the fact that he is not with you, it seems he will not leave his room, not even for a situation like this. He wasn't there. The room was empty. What the... Where could he have gone at a time like this? Do you mean to say the master has left his study? That is correct. I was surprised myself. I wonder when he left his room. Do any of you have an idea? Natsu looked at Genji and Kanon as she said this. Maybe she was trying to ask whether the servants who served directly under the one-winged eagle knew of a place he might go. However, it was probably the other way around. Their faces made it clear that those who knew Kinzo best realized even more than the rest how impossible it was for him to leave his room. Even we have no idea. As you all know, within that study, the master had everything from a place to sleep to a bathroom. I couldn't imagine him leaving that room except for a significant reason. In that case, what? Isn't it natural to assume that one of these significant reasons came up? We still cannot be certain that's the case. Anyway, he is a fickle person, so it's possible he went for a walk by himself unaware of the current situation. If that is the case, we must act in all haste to tell him what has happened and ask for instructions. That's right. Although I don't want to think about it, it's possible that something has happened to him, isn't it? I'd rather not even consider such a sinister possibility. No one had seen Kinzo since the discovery of those 6 terrible corpses. On top of that, the phones were broken, the radio wouldn't reach anyone, and there was no way to contact the police. Apparently the typhoon would leave tomorrow and a boat would come, but until then, no one could rely on anyone outside the island, nor could they escape the island. The tragedy had hit everyone so abruptly that they'd lost all their composure. Everyone felt a heavy silence. Everyone was impatient. Even though they needed to do something, they couldn't think of anything, so some of them held their heads in their arms while the others got irritated. Right now, no one could explain what was occurring on this island, Rokkenjima. After that, we ate the breakfast Kumasawa-san had made, which felt dry and tasteless. Of course, this was right after something like that had happened. No one felt particularly hungry. However, we understood logically that not eating would weaken our bodies. It would also be rude to Kumasawa-san, who had made the breakfast. Kumasawa-san had taken some unusual Western vegetables, ones that Goda-san had probably ordered for his ultra-elaborate meal, and cooked them in a Japanese style, which made them turn an unpleasant color. As to what Goda-san had been planning to cook with those ingredients. Right then, I couldn't even imagine it. If I did think about it, I'd be reminded of the way Goda-san died, and a sour taste would fill the inside of my mouth. Everyone pretended to eat for the time being, but of course no one made much progress. Then we began pooling our knowledge of our current situation. First off, 6 people, which included Uncle Kraus, my dad, Kirie-san, Aunt Rosa, Goda-san, and Shannon-chan, had been found in the Rose Garden storehouse as brutally mutilated corpses. And yet we still couldn't contact the police since both the phones and the radio were unusable, so until the typhoon passes, there was nothing we could do. Furthermore, grandfather, who we might have hoped would be able to show a little leadership in this kind of a situation, had disappeared some time ago. Goda-san hadn't made breakfast, so grandfather's stomach must have been empty, and if he had just been taking a casual walk, we should have been able to hear him whining about how hungry he was by now. And despite that, he hadn't appeared. There was more than just a small chance that he'd gotten caught up in this crime. According to my aunts on their way back from Kinza's study, they'd searched for him, calling out on every floor, but were unable to find him. Considering the timing of it all, it's only reasonable to assume that this disappearance had something to do with the crime. I figured Dad and the rest were probably killed in the dining hall and painstakingly moved to the storehouse, so maybe Grandfather had already been killed and dragged to some strange place which we simply haven't discovered yet. No one actually said it out loud, but this theory seemed extremely convincing. We will go check that all of the windows and doors are locked. We must also conduct a thorough search for Father. The children must remain in this room. Eva-san and Hideyoshi-san, I'm sorry, but please stay here with the children. I'd like to ask you the same, Dr. Nanjo. I understand. We'll wait here. Natsu followed the servants, Genji-san, Kumasawa-san, and Kanan-kun out of the parlor. All that was left was Aunt Eva, Uncle Hideyoshi, Dr. Nanjo, and the 4 of us children, a total of 7 people. Let's all stick together and maybe watch some television while we wait, though I doubt we'll find anything good in the middle of the day on a Sunday. Uncle Hideyoshi started acting cheerfully, trying to brighten up this gloomy atmosphere. Ooh, good show, watch it, watch it. Ooh. Oh really? You want to watch TV, Maria-chan? Then come and watch it with your uncle. Maria was the only one who joined in. Even though Maria had been told of her mother's death, she didn't show the slightest flicker in her emotions. Was it really normal for a 9-year-old girl like Maria to act so much like a very young child? Everyone else's mood failed to improve, and they each sank absent-mindedly into their sofas. Aniki, can I ask you something? What is it? Just now in the storehouse, you said something about Shannon-chan and a ring. Did you give that to her? George Aniki didn't answer, but he hung his head and closed both of his eyes. There could be no clearer response. Quit a Balor. Figure it out yourself. You're right. I shouldn't have asked. That's right. It was me. Last night, I proposed to her. That was when I gave her the ring. I told her that tomorrow she should put it on whatever finger she wanted, as her answer. So it was a pretty pretentious thing to say. That ring had been on the ring finger of Shannon-chan's left hand. Well, several years ago, Shannon came to me asking for advice about your George Nissan. I wonder what she could have said. Shannon was always really bad at lying. It was obvious pretty quickly that you were the one she was talking about. She asked whether it would be okay for her to get close to someone, even though she was only a servant. She asked about what kind of things boys like, what kind of clothes she should wear to make them happy, lots of stuff like that. Well, I guess you could say I felt envious hearing her say that. Then she was given an engagement ring, and it all ended right there. Different people value things differently, but being proposed to by a man, well, it can be the high point of your life, so last night, I'm sure Shannon was happy from the bottom of her heart, happier than she's ever been since the day of her birth. George Aniki sighed deeply without raising his head, or maybe tears had risen to his eyes. It seems Shannon was on duty in the guest house last night, but because she was too embarrassed to go back to the guest house with me, she went over to the mansion. Think about how Shannon must have felt. You receive an engagement ring, then no matter how much warning you've been given beforehand, it's perfectly normal to get so excited that your mind goes blank. She must have been incredibly embarrassed. And then Shannon went to the mansion, even though she hadn't been assigned there, helped Goto-san with his work and got caught up in this crime. If only I hadn't given her that ring on that day. In that place, Saya wouldn't have been caught up in that crime. Aniki, that's the one place where you're wrong. That's definitely wrong, so don't cry. Balor-kun, let's leave him be. After Aunt Ava said that, I stopped talking to him. Misplaced words of comfort might actually do more harm than good. Jessica sat down next to Aniki and put an arm around him. Maybe only Jessica, who had known about Aniki and Shannon's love since the beginning, and who had even discussed that relationship with Shannon, could comfort Aniki now. Went over to Aunt Ava and sat down on the opposite sofa. Balor-kun, you really are strong. It looks like you've kept a good hold on yourself. Well, look, the depth of the love becomes the depth of the wound, right? After all, it's not like how that old bastard died has anything to do with me. I feel bad about Kiria-san, but, well, she wasn't actually my parent. My. If that's so, you certainly were crying a lot back then. Well, I did think at least that much crying was due as gratitude to the parent who raised me. The speed of that changeover in that dry tone must have come from Rudolph. That kid would always get violently happy, sad, angry. He'd always regain his cool immediately afterwards. It's nothing like that. I haven't really been able to get over the shock yet. I think the only difference between me and everyone else is the kinds of emotions it stirred in me. What do you mean? I've been acting much calmer than George, Aniki, and Jessica. That wasn't because my sadness was any less intense or because I'd already recovered. My sadness was simply getting replaced gradually with a different emotion. Rather than sad, I'd say I'm more pissed off. What bastard did this, and where? It's kind of been eating at me that I didn't get a chance to smack him upside the face. And that was what I really wanted to do. I couldn't forgive myself if I just sat there overwhelmed with sadness and hugging my knees. Since the time that Dad and the others were killed, this island has been covered by the typhoon, which means the bastard responsible for all this is still somewhere on the island. Yes, that would seem to be the case. I wonder if they're hiding somewhere in that dark forest even now. I felt like I'd had a very similar conversation with Kiria-san the night before. That's right. After the letter from the person claiming to be Beatrice appeared at the dinner table last night, we talked about whether or not a 19th person actually exists. Eva, do you think this murder has anything to do with the letter from Beatrice last night? That one? Well, I wonder. All of the siblings agreed that the mysterious letter was sent to further complicate the problem of father's inheritance. As to whether that and the case this morning are related, it's impossible to tell at this stage. Was that letter really given to Maria by some witch called Beatrice? How could it be? All of it was a farce devised by father, wasn't it? He made Shannon-chan or someone wear the dress from the portrait and trick Maria-chan, right? Isn't that just the kind of overly intricate prank father would pull? Last night, I talked with Kiria-san about whether Beatrice actually exists, and Kiria-san also said that Beatrice was probably one of the 18 of us. Isn't that obvious? There's no one else on this island besides us, right? And there must be someone amongst us who's pretending to be Beatrice. There's no one else but us on this island, do you think? Obviously, right? Are you saying that there could be someone else here other than us? No one is on this island except us. There are only 18 people, so the one pretending to be Beatrice has to be one of those 18. Kiria-san denied the existence of a 19th person by spinning the chessboard around. Even though Aunt Ava hadn't constructed an argument that complicated, her opinion at least was the same. Except if that's the case, our situation starts to look very ugly. At the time of Beatrice's letter, the whole thing could be passed off as a prank set up by someone or another. However, if we're assuming there's no 19th person, we can't ignore this anymore. In other words, if there is no 19th person, then the culprit who killed Dad and the others is also one of the 18, right? So in other words, the person who killed them is one of the people inside this very mansion right now. Aunt Ava smiled meaningfully. It looked like she thought this conclusion should have been obvious from the very beginning. The culprit carried the bodies of those 6 into the storehouse. But even that was an impressive feat, don't you think? That shutter is always closed and locked, right? In other words, in order to carry them into the storehouse, the culprit would need to unlock the shutter. Understand? Is it possible the shutter was left open by mistake that day? The servant said it's always kept locked. In other words, unless the culprit took the keys from the servant room, there's no way they could have opened the storehouse. I wonder if the key in the servant room was the only one. Genji-san said that was the case, which means the culprit knew where that single key was kept and took it. Just now I watched when Kanon-kun returned the key to the servant room. The wall was packed with keys, and I don't think a novice would know where or what those keys went to. The culprit was miraculously able to find the storehouse key amongst all of those. Furthermore, even though the key didn't have a tag or anything sticking to it, they knew it was the key to the storehouse behind the rose garden, and that means they also knew where the storehouse was. I'll say it even clearer. The culprit knew the inside of the servant room well. Her argument was extremely plain and clear. If the bodies had been found somewhere in the bushes of the rose garden, there wouldn't have been much to go on. However, if there's only one key to the storehouse in the servant room, and it was stored with such a large group of keys, a novice would not be able to tell them apart. This meant that the culprit was someone who went in the servant room a lot and was familiar with the locations of the keys. The family members didn't normally go into the servant room, which meant that one of the servants is the culprit. I'm sorry, but even I can't tell you any more than that. However, I'll tell you one thing. What's that? It's reasonable to think that the culprit... No, culprits are multiple in number and fairly well armed. They'd have to be, wouldn't they? They had to assault the 4 in the dining hall and kill them, drag a total of 6 bodies all the way to the storehouse beyond the rose garden, and arrange for that disgusting makeup and the graffiti on the shutter. There's no way that a single culprit could carry out all of that on their own, right? It made sense. It probably would have been possible for a single person with enough time, but it would take so incredibly long. It's probably safe to assume that a significant number of people were involved. Oh, so what you're saying is that maybe all of the servants were in cahoots. Please keep it quiet, okay? It wouldn't be right to voice mere speculation like this. And if it really is true, what would you do next? They might not let us leave here alive. This is an opponent who had no problem killing Nissan and the 3 others. Right now, the only ones I can count on to fight with me are the 3 in my family and maybe you, which comes to a total of 4 people, right? We're no better off than they were last night. In short, it'd be easy for the culprits to massacre the rest of us. I'd been playing detective with Aunt Ava, trying to expose the person who had killed Dad and the rest before the police did. If only I could cleverly penetrate the culprit's identity and stick the proof in their face, I'd been so sure that, just like in one of those detective movies, the culprit would then give up and surrender. However, the culprit would only surrender if there was no way for them to fight back. The culprits behind the crime on this island were far from helpless, and might even be able to massacre all of the remaining people here. And on top of that, this island was like a giant closed room, cut off from the outside world by the typhoon, so they had a full day until tomorrow to kill, scheme, and camouflage themselves. In short, it wasn't a safe atmosphere where we could get very far by playing detective. To the contrary, we were at a stage where we had to be scared stiff, since playing detective might displease the culprits and cause them to commit another mass murder. Oh, this is all just a possibility, right? But I can't bring myself to trust the servants yet, and that doesn't mean I only suspect them. Don't you think there might be some mastermind behind all this? Mastermind? Why do you say that? It's just a feeling. Think about what the word servant literally means. It means someone who serves as someone else's arms and legs, right? It was a bunch of Ushiromiya family members who got killed, so naturally there must be someone involved who stands to gain from that result. This was also plain and clear. The Ushiromiya family had been right in the middle of the discussions on how to distribute the inheritance when grandfather died. If this case followed the standard form of any classic mystery novel, the crime was definitely caused by someone with ties to the Ushiromiya family and who was involved in the inheritance problem. Ava had probably read a few books in that genre herself. Her argument may have had a few blind assumptions in it, but it was a standard conclusion that anyone might have reached. I think most people would end up suspecting the servants, even if they used different reasoning to get there. Especially the story about the key to the shutter, that made it very easy to suspect that one of the servants was involved. And that's why I don't like it. What do you mean you don't like it? I'm just talking to myself. I tried to dodge her question by joking, but I couldn't erase the sense of unease welling up inside me. After all, her conclusion was such an easy one to reach. A conclusion that anyone could reach. And I just couldn't be satisfied with that. If I tried spinning the chessboard around like I had learned from Kiryu-san, this is exactly why a servant couldn't possibly be the culprit. If the servants really were the culprits, they wouldn't hide the bodies in a place connected to themselves. Why on earth would they use a rose garden shed if they were the ones in charge of the key that could unlock it? The police would probably immediately pursue whoever had been in control of the key. It was even possible that some other facts might come to light as a result. The more we think of the servants as the culprits, the less reason they had to carry the bodies into the storehouse. But what if they knew we'd think that and put the corpses in the storehouse for that very reason? No, that's completely impossible. When the police come and inspect the scene of the crime, they'll probably be able to uncover many things. No matter how carefully the culprits carried out that murder, some traces will definitely be found. In other words, they had everything to lose and nothing to gain. If you think about it this way and look at this murder game from the culprit's side, it's hard to imagine why they'd want to call attention to the corpses. Once the corpses were found, it could result in someone sending a report to the police, or it might make the remaining people more cautious, or it might make the survivors start to search for the culprit. None of those things would make life any easier for the culprit. It's just like the words of the main character's mother in a novel I read recently named Higurashi no Naku Koro Ni. Every story needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Eliminating that beginning is essential for the perfect crime. Right now we don't know where grandfather is. We don't know if he's already become a victim or if he's one of the culprits, but the state of confusion must be beneficial to the killer. The culprit has absolutely nothing to gain by showing us the bodies in such an obvious way and making us all realize there's been a murder. In fact, this is the perfect place to spin the chessboard around. In other words, showing us the corpses in such a flashy way must be the culprit's goal in and of itself. So at the very least, to the culprit, the appearance of 6 corpses there meant more than the deaths themselves. In other words, the culprit wanted this murder on display. To whom? To us. This is a message. The culprit's trying to shove something in our faces. I don't know what it is. At this point in time, this vulgar mass murder isn't making me feel anything except a malice directed towards all of us. Malice towards all of us. Is it? Each one of the survivors has some kind of connection to one of the 6 victims. Uncle Kras's death brought Jessica the grief of losing a family member. The deaths of Dad and Kiryu-san brought me sorrow, while Aunt Rose's death brought Maria sorrow. Oda-san's death probably shocked his fellow servants, and Shannon-chan's death brought grief both to George Aniki, who had proposed to her, and Kanan-kun, who had loved her like an older sister. Everyone now on this island has received an equal amount of sadness. Aunt Ava was sure that these servants were in cahoots, but then how could you explain the deaths of Goda-san and Shannon-chan? At any rate, by this argument, the grief caused by the 6 deaths hit everyone but Aunt Ava and Uncle Hideyoshi. Even Aunt Ava, who had directed suspicion at the servants and acted as though she herself was beyond suspicion, could not be ruled out as a suspect. In the first place, she was able to argue that the servants were suspicious by focusing on the shutter's key, but if you looked at it from a perspective of motive and who would gain, Aunt Ava's name rises to the top of the list. I know what you're thinking, Butler-kun. Huh? Oh no, please don't tell anybody about how my head's so full of obscene stuff. I'm the one who's going to gain the most from these murders. Since I'm going to be suspected anyway, I might as well get it out in the open. I tried to dodge the issue by joking around, but apparently it didn't work. The inheritance will be divided into as many parts as there are siblings, but right now I'm the only one of the 4 left. All the assets of the Ushiromiya family will become mine. If Uncle Hideyoshi heard you, he'd say, "Could you give it a rest? It's not funny." I'm sorry, I was just fooling around since I'm going to be suspected anyway, no matter how much I try to smooth it over. That's why, from my point of view, the murder might have been designed to cast suspicion on me. Unfortunately, my alibi for last night is weak. Could you tell me a bit more about last night? As you know, the discussion between the siblings of how to slice up and eat the inheritance continued until late into the night, but I don't know how late it lasted. My husband and I had woken up early that morning. We were so sleepy, and a little past midnight, they let us go. We then returned to the guest house and rested there. Can anyone under that Uncle Hideyoshi prove that? No, wait, it's not like I suspect you or anything, okay? Oh, are you sure about that? I don't know if it counts as proof, but when we returned to the guest house, we were greeted by Genji-san, who asked if we needed a towel. I think that should be enough to prove we returned to the guest house a little after midnight. Though, if my theory was correct, the servants would all be in cahoots, and that wouldn't actually make for much of an alibi. Hey, you've got a point there. Guess that means I'm playing detective with a real culprit right now. Huh? However, let me say this for my honor's sake. If I was after the inheritance, I'd never commit such a bizarre set of murders. After all, I just wanted to make them forfeit their rights to the inheritance. It wouldn't matter to me how they died. It'd be much smarter of me to try and make their deaths look like accidents, especially if you're assuming I laid out some careful plan that involved even the servants. You've got a point there. If you're killing someone for personal gain, you definitely shouldn't make it look like a murder. Exactly. That's why I'm in such a blue mood. The police will probably treat me like a mastermind and investigate all kinds of things. Not fun at all. Aunt Ava shrugged with a bitter smile. It was just as easy to suspect Aunt Ava as it was to suspect the servants. So if we spin the chessboard around, does that make it impossible for the culprit to be her, suspicious as she is? However, if that sort of argument always works, then motive can never help us in any way. No, that can't be right. Knowing the motive must give us powerful clues towards knowing the culprit. That's why murderers from all time periods disguise crimes in complicated ways, clearly preventing their motives from being discovered. I don't get it. I just don't get it. Every time I spin the chessboard around, it keeps flipping from front to back and back to front. Are my thoughts bringing me closer to the truth, or are they... Okay. That's enough. My voice is tired. Thanks for coming. Or next time.